The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 25th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, "For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents and saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. And see, I have made 2 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew that you are a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours.' But his master replied, 'You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I do not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was mine with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. Well, that ought to put the Mary Mary into our upcoming Christmas season.
Thanksgiving.
Oh no, I'm on Christmas already. Vera's got me watching Hallmark since like 3 weeks ago. It's just nonstop Christmas, and I love it. Not because I love Christmas, but I just love seeing stories that have happy endings. Stories where people are smiling, they're not killing one another. Stories where people are actually going out of their way to be nice to one another. But this story doesn't have a whole lot of that in there. In fact, this story is a story that Jesus told to his disciples during the week when he came into Jerusalem just a few days before he would be crucified. What he was trying to teach them was what was to come. And it wasn't just what was to come in the next week or the next months, but what is to come with God's kingdom. And he said, it was like the master of a household who was going away. And of course, Jesus was talking about himself. And he said, the master of the household entrusted to his slaves, and I know that we don't like to be called slaves, but that was the language of the day. And when we think about it, we are servants of God. And so I hope no one gets offended when we read this scripture, but indeed, we are servants of God. We are God's children. We belong to God, and I'm thankful for that. But he took his servants, and he gave one 5 talents, he gave the other 2 talents, and he gave the third one 1 talent. It said each according to his ability. Now the guy with 5 talents was a real go-getter, went out, made 5 more talents. The guy with 2 talents went out, same thing, doubled his money. The third guy, though, played it safe. He didn't want to lose the money, but he didn't want to risk the money. So he just buried it in the backyard. And of course, finally, after it says a long time, the master came back. And no one knew when the master was coming back. But when he did, he called them to account for themselves. And so that first man said, you gave me 5 talents, and look, I gave you 5 additional, 10 talents. Now we need to understand that talent was a weight measurement. And usually when they talked about talents, it was gold or silver. A talent would be approximately 20 years worth of what you would make in your lifetime. It was a pretty good sum of money. And so the first guy makes 5 more talents. That's 100 years worth of what he could have made in his lifetime. Well, his master looked at him and said, way to go. You did what I expected of you to do, and you did even better than that. So I'm going to give to you even more. And welcome now into my place. And so the second guy comes up and says, Master, you gave me 2 talents, and look, I got you 2 more. I doubled your money. And of course he said, very good. You did all that I could ask of you and even more. Come into my kingdom. Now the third guy said, well, Master, I knew you were a hard man. I knew that you could be cruel. I knew that when people speak of your wrath, it's a real thing. And, well, I didn't want to get on your bad side, so I figured I'm just going to bury it. So here you go. I didn't lose it. Here you go. Well, of course, the master was more than upset. The master said, you know what? If I wanted to play it safe, I could have taken all my money and I could have put it in the bank, and when I came back, I would have had the interest to live on. That's not what I wanted. What I wanted you to do was do something with what I gave you. You see, what Jesus was telling his disciples and what Jesus is telling us even today is, I have given you all that you need in this world, and what I want you to do is to risk it. I want you to risk what you have been given, and in doing so, when you risk it, it will multiply exponentially. And that is what I want you to do. Now, some of us are very glad to do that. Some of us are risk takers. Now, Vera and I, we're pretty conservative in things that we do, but as I looked over our lives together, number one, she risked it all to even say yes to marrying me. And then she risked it all because back then, I was still a volunteer firefighter, and I used to like to do weird stuff like, I don't know, I would rappel off the side of anything. It could be a cliff, it could be a building. I've rappelled out of helicopters before. I was somewhat of an adrenaline junkie. And yes, somebody in this congregation has a picture of me riding a bicycle off the roof of the house. And so, yes, I took risks, and she took a risk on me. And then we took a risk, not only getting married, but also deciding that we were going to build a house. How foolish is that for an 18 and 19-year-old person? And yet we took a risk, and guess what? We're still in that house. We raised 2 beautiful sons in that house. And that again was a whole other set of risks right there. Because they don't come with manuals, and of course you never know what's going to go on, and yet you risk it all when you risk loving people. So you risk it all when you, of course, love someone as you do, and especially when they love you back, and you find out just how blessed you can be and how whatever you've risked seems to multiply and come back to you. in ways that you could not ever expect, and it does. And then you risk it all again. You bring these children into the world, and you love them. And yes, there are times that they will break your heart. But at the same time, you know you would never, ever do anything differently. Because the good times far outweigh the bad. And that because you are willing to take that chance on raising these children in the world, there are so many blessings that come from it. Yesterday, Vera got a small package in the mail. And of course it said from Nathan, so we knew that it was from our son who's presently in Bellingham, Washington, which he calls the West Coast Erie, because it rains every day and they've already had snow. But inside was this leather-bound, it was a handmade little journal, and there was writing in it. And Nathan said, this was a late birthday gift. And he said, I wanted you to remember me and also to write things down. And then you flip the page, and he actually made a drawing of himself. It looks like a photograph. It is that good. But it was so special to receive because, number one, Nathan is not usually good at remembering birthdays. But number two, because he went out of his way to find something that was not only handmade, but something that he personalized and made himself. Those are the days when you remember it's worth taking the risk. Jesus wants us to take those risks because he wants us to understand that God has invested his love and his grace and his mercy in us. And what he's hoping that we do is we take that same love and mercy and grace and that we reinvest it in others in this world. And the hope is that we will take that risk, knowing that with every risk, there can be reward or there can be loss. But God wants us to take that risk anyway. You know, there are no guarantees in this life, as they say. And when you venture something, you have to realize that it will either go very well or it can go very bad. But you have to at least do it before either one of those things will happen. Now, a lot of people want to play it safe. A lot of people say, well, you know what? Nothing ventured, nothing gained, but at least I have the original with me. I want you to think about this. I want you, every day of your life, to look at whoever comes down the street, or whoever you may have in contact with at work or at play, wherever you might be at. And I want you to look at that person, and I want you to think, will I see them in heaven? Will I see them in heaven? And if you don't know the answer to that question, then maybe, just maybe, we need to invest some of our time and some of our efforts and some of what we have been given to maybe introduce ourselves, or maybe get to know them a little bit better. Maybe we invest our time and resources with them so that we might be able to share our faith with them, and most certainly be able to share our love with them. Knowing full well that what we put out there might be received gladly, or it might be thrown away or batted down, but willing to take the risk no less. Trusting that God will have either opened their hearts or maybe at least open their ears enough so they can hear, and someday, God will work His love into their lives. But at least we will have taken the risk to plant that seed. You see, God doesn't want us to sit on our hands. God does not want us to just come here on a Sunday morning and worship Him and be done for the week. Rather, God wants us to take what we have and risk it for His sake. To risk it for the sake of the world. To be willing to go out into a world that is not friendly and try anyway. You know, I so wish that in this parable there would have been a guy who lost it. I wish there would have been one who took it all and said, I rolled the dice and I'm empty-handed, because I got to believe God would have said, enter into my kingdom. You did all that I asked you to do. And I do believe that happens. Because there are no guarantees. But God wants us to be willing to do something with what He has given us and not be content just to sit on it or hide it in the ground. I remember reading this story about a man who had been married to his wife for many, many years. And they had many things that they loved doing together. And one of the things she loved most of all was gardening. And she had some beautiful flowers in her garden. And then one year her health declined and, well, she passed away. And all those beautiful flowers went to seed, and her husband went and collected those seeds and put them in a jar. And then he put them on a shelf in his garage. And every day he would go out and grab that jar and look at those seeds and remember his wife and remember those beautiful flowers. And then he would put that jar back on the shelf. Day after day, season after season, year after year, he would go out and look at that jar and then put it back on the shelf. After a few years of this, his next door neighbor, who happened to be his very best friend, went in that garage, took those seeds, tilled the soil, and planted those seeds in the ground. Not knowing if his neighbor would ever speak to him again, not knowing how angry this man might or might not be with him, he took the chance and he planted those flowers, and those flowers bloomed. In fact, they were the brightest and biggest blooms that were ever seen in that yard. And yes, at first, that man was not happy with his neighbor. But when those flowers poked up through and they began to bloom, well, all he could do was run over and put his arms around his neighbor and say, thank you. You see, he realized that those flowers, those seeds, were something that needed to be put in the ground so that they might bloom forth again, not just so that he might remember, but so that he could share those with others. That anybody that would come by who would admire these flowers, he could tell the story of his life, his wife's life, and how she brought beauty and grace into the world. And it was so evident by the way these flowers had bloomed. But if it was up to him, he would have tucked those things away and kept them on the shelf until he was gone. And Jesus said, I'll give you the seed. You can scatter it, and something may just grow. Or you can keep it in the garage on the shelf. But if you're going to do the risk of my Father, you're going to have to take those seeds off the shelf. You're going to have to risk it all and plant it in the ground, not knowing if they're going to come up or whether they're going to grow amongst the weeds or wherever they may be. But just trust. And someday they may bloom. You may not see it, but they might just bloom. But first, you have to take them off the shelf. So that's what God, in Jesus Christ, was telling His disciples to do, and that is what He is telling us to do. To take our faith off the shelf, to open our faith up to others, to share the seed that has been planted in us by God's Holy Spirit, and to go into the world and share it. And when we do that, we know there will be a return. We don't know how much, we don't know when, we don't know what it will be, but at least God says, risk it. Risk it for my sake. And if you do that, you will know riches beyond all comparison. You do that, you be a risk taker, and you share what you have, and one day you will hear the words, "Well done, faithful servant. Enter into my joy."